Well, good morning again. So this past week, my parents were in town, and last Sunday, many of you were able to meet them. Thanks for your hospitality. They absolutely loved spending time here in Coral Gables, and one of their favorite things was all of the restaurants that we have here. They ate, well, I feel like we kind of walked and ate the entire week that they were here. But one of the evenings, we were at a restaurant on Miracle Mile, and I won't tell you which one it was, and our waiter was named Philip, a very nice young man. We came in and we sat down and we placed our order with Philip, and then we were talking. And a few minutes went by and he came back over and he said, well, I'm really sorry, there's a little bit of a delay in the kitchen, but your food is coming. We said, fine, we're having a wonderful time, we're talking. A little more time went by and we were starting to wonder a little bit about the food, but we were having a good time talking. But Philip came back over and again apologized and said, I'm so sorry, I really don't know what's happening in the kitchen, but your food is coming. Okay, good. A few more minutes went by, and Philip came back over again and again apologized and said, I'm so sorry, I really am. Your food is in process, it's not ready yet, but here is some free soup for all three of you. And so we had wonderful soup, it was very good, and then the food eventually came out and we were enjoying it. And at the end of the meal, Philip came back over again after we had cleaned up the dishes, everything was gone, and he was bringing the dessert tray. And I don't eat dessert very often, but he brought it over and he said, I want you all to choose one of these, each of you, and it's on the house, it's on me. So we really don't have to do that. We were fine, we enjoyed our food, the soup was great, thank you so much, and he said, no, you all were so nice, I want you to have this. And that was when I had to ask Philip a question. I said, Philip, have people been mean to you tonight? Are people mean to you in general? Because we were totally fine. No, did we look like we were angry? He said, no. He goes, it was just so nice that you were not mad at me. So I didn't tell you the restaurant because I don't want you to go looking for Philip and expect to be able to, get some free food. But it occurred to me that in our culture right now, which is so bitter and angry and quick to rush into bitterness, that even just now being nice is actually a witness for God's love. And so my parents and I were having a discussion afterwards about what Christian love is supposed to look like. And we were talking about 1 Corinthians 13 specifically. But one of the things I have to admit to you this morning is that for a very long time, 1 Corinthians 13 was not one of my favorite passages. And that was because in the first 12 years of my ministry, every single, and I mean every single couple I met with to do a wedding wanted 1 Corinthians 13 in there. And full disclosure, it was in my wedding as well to my husband. Now, how many of you out here, either in your own wedding had 1 Corinthians 13 or remember at least one wedding that had it in there? Not so many back here, okay. 1 Corinthians 13 is known as the love chapter, and I swear just about every couple loves it. But I didn't want it, and every time a couple would say, well, I would really like 1 Corinthians 13, I was like, oh, there's so many wonderful passages in the Bible, choose something else. But of course, I didn't actually say that. I just said 1 Corinthians 13, awesome, we're going to use it. But then about 2 years ago, I started digging into it. I started really looking into what 1 Corinthians 13 said. And as you know me now, and you know I'm such a nerd, it may seem weird to you that it took me 12 years to start digging into this passage, but that's just how much I did not like it and did not want to. But when I did, it changed the way that I read it. Because this is a wonderful blueprint for how it is that we are to love each other. And although it's used primarily in weddings, it was actually not written for weddings. It was written for how it is that we are to love each other in community and in the world. And so I have a little work for you this morning. I want you to take out your bulletins, and I want you to flip to the last page of the scriptures. And that section in there that starts out, love is patient, love is kind. Now I want you to grab a pen or a pencil or a crayon or whatever it is that you have closest to you, because we are going to mark up this page, all right? So we're on the section that starts out, love is patient, love is kind, and you grab a pen or a pencil. Okay, so we are now in the second week of this Be the Love series, and last week Pastor Lucas talked about love of God. Today we're talking about love of neighbor. You remember Jesus talking to the people who were coming to question him and said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, this passage gives us an incredible, wonderful prescription for being able to do that. So we're going to start out with love is patient. I want you to circle patient. Love is patient. Now, the word is actually a word I talked about in the Jonah series, macrothemia, and it means long-suffering or long-tempered. It's often used to talk about God's love for us. And the way that it's often translated when we're talking about God is slow to anger. So that word thyma, it means to blow up in anger. It means to have a passionate outburst. And macros means long or far off. And so this word that we translate is as patience actually means to be very, very slow to anger. Why is that important? Well, I'll tell you that the first time I realized that, it hit me, it convicted me, because I realized that one of the first things that I do, the red hair is not just for show, I have a wicked temper. And so one of the first things when something is wrong or it just seems like something has been said against me or it hurts me, I want to respond in anger. It's just automatic. And this reminds me that being patient, taking that step back, that it can make all the difference. And I've talked before in here about just how amazing I think these gifts of brains are that God has given to us. And that at the center of our brain, right above the brainstem, there's something called the limbic system. And the limbic system is where all of the information that we take in goes first, and it's really the seat of our emotion. It's where we would feel anger. It's where we feel passion. But that is the first place that all of these senses go, and that tends to be the first place that we want to act out of. But it's often not the best place to act out of. When we are patient, when we step back, when we wait a moment, that gives what's right in front, back of our foreheads a chance to kick in, our prefrontal cortex. And that part of our brain is what can look at different consequences for the actions that we're thinking. It also gives us the ability to step into the other person's shoes, to imagine what it may be like for them. And then when we have all of that information, then we can act in a much healthier way. But our culture, especially it seems right now, is so wanting us to act immediately. And social media makes that really way, way too easy. So you are angry about something, you see something, you act, you post about it, you're tweeting, you're putting it on Facebook, there's a video, there's a meme. All of these different things are keeping us from being patient. And so everything in this 1 Corinthians 13 is deeply countercultural. And it starts right there. And then we go to kind. I want you to find kind in your bulletin and circle that as well. This word comes from the root krestos, and it means to be useful. It means to be beneficial. So this is not just a kind that's like, nice people. You're just nice. It's active. It means that you are actually trying to use your words and your actions to make a difference in the lives of the people around you. So in many ways, this is that patience being put into action in the world around us, being able to take the time to understand what is happening and then to find ways to be a benefit to those around us. Instead of reacting, we are reaching out. And we're doing it not expecting anything in return, simply out of the overflow of God's love. And so patient and kind it begins. And then everything else flows from that. The next one is envious. So put a line through that one, cross that one right out. Love is not envious. The word is zelo, and it's an onomatopoetic word, which means it's a word that is supposed to sound like what it's describing. So think of like sizzle in English, so it sounds like eggs on a hot pan. Sizzle or gurgle. It's that kind of a word. And so zeloo means to bubble up out of being too hot. And so it's a word that talks about being passionate about something. And it's actually used in the Bible both positively and negatively. And here it's being very much used in a negative way. It's talking about being jealous, about having this boiling up in you and wanting what the other person has for yourself. It is a very selfish motivation. It's a competitive motivation as well, because we start to think that there is scarcity in the world. And so if this person has something good and I want it, there's not going to be enough for me as well. And so I want it. This keeps us from celebrating other people's victories. This keeps us from celebrating those because we believe that if they are victorious, that we will not be as well. It's a very damaging thing in relationships. Love is not envious. It's also, that next word, cross this one out as well, boastful. Cross that one out. Love is not boastful. Love is not a braggart. Love is not showing off. Love is not demanding of too much attention. And this is actually very closely connected with envy, because when we are bragging, when we're boasting, we are trying to show our superiority to those around us. And by doing that, we're showing that we are now above the other people. So what we have, what we are, what we can do is so much better than you could ever imagine, pushing the other person down. It's also incredibly, incredibly painful. And that is closely linked to arrogant. Cross that one out as well. This one is a completely fascinating word in the Greek to me. It actually means air bellows. You ever seen like the air bellows that you use to push together to pump something up? Well, that is what this word means. It means to be puffed up with pride. It means to be swelled up with pride. It is inflating our own self-image. It is the exact opposite of humility. We are called to live lives of humility. This is the exact opposite of it. Inflating our own self-image, giving ourselves and the world around us an opinion that is not accurate. And it is trying to make others jealous of us. And so it's the flip side of that, envying others. We're trying to make others envy us because we're inflating what it is that we have in our lives. The next one, rude. Cross that one out too. Put a line right through it. Rude is just acting in a way that's offensive to others. That's a pretty obvious one, no special Greek in there. But it's an easy way for us to be able to say that love has good manners. We're sensitive to the needs of others. We're paying attention to what is happening around us. Think about it this way. When you have someone in your life that you are looking up to, maybe a boss or somebody who has a lot more experience in the world or something, that you're looking up to them, you will just kind of naturally become courteous to them. We are discourteous to people who we think are less than us. And that's what I think was happening with Philip in that restaurant that evening, that people were not paying attention to the stress that he was under in that moment, and so they were being discourteous to him. Love is not rude, because love cares about the people around us. The next one, you're going to put a line through this whole phrase, insist on its own way. Love does not insist on its own way. Love is not selfish. Love is not selfish. It doesn't demand its own rights. It is seeking to be able to help the others. Very often in our lives, we think that the way that we do things, the way we want things to be, is the right way. Anybody else ever done that, or is it just me? If everybody would just do what I said, everything would be fine. We've all thought that most likely at some point or another. But love does not insist on its own way. Because the people in our lives have wisdom, they have experience, they have their own ways of doing things, and we can learn from each other. And that is an incredibly important thing to realize. But you see, when we insist on our own way, we are showing the opposite of love. Many years ago, someone told me that hate is the opposite of love, but in that moment, I very much disagreed with them. I do not think that hate is the opposite of love. I think that selfishness is the opposite of love. Because love, when it's being done right, when it's being done in the way that God intended, it is by nature self-giving, self-sacrificial, looking to raise up the other person. And so selfishness is the opposite of that, which can lead to hate, but it's not just that. Love, you see, is an important part of that ability to relate to people. Okay, the next one. Love is not irritable. The word that's translated there as irritable is a sharp item. It's like having a knife. And so it's sharp-edged, sharp temper, easily provoked, having a hair trigger temper. And it's the opposite of patience, which is long-tempered. So love is not irritable. It does not make the people around us walk on eggshells. We don't want the people around us to be so afraid of making a mistake because we are going to become angry at them. Love is meant to not be sharp-edged, but instead to be a place of safety, a place of comfort, always, no matter what. The next one, resentful. Cross that one right out. Other translations render this, keeps no record of wrongs. This is actually an accounting term, like you're putting together a balance sheet, looking at what's coming in and what's coming out, and what has been going out is just so much more than everything else. God does not keep a list of all of the things that we have done wrong. I know that if that were the case, I would be in a mighty amount of trouble. Instead, God has Jesus who's come to earth, and instead of seeing the list of our sins, God sees Jesus' perfection and love and sacrifice for us. And so that is wiped clean. Psalm 32 says it like this: "Oh, what joy for those whose disobedience is forgiven, whose sin is put out of sight. What joy for those whose record the Lord has cleared of guilt." And so just in the same way that God has done that for us, we are called to do that for those around us. Not to keep a record of all of the wrongs that they have done to us, but instead seeing them as a beautiful child of God, imperfect just as we are imperfect. All right, the next line, cross this out. Rejoice in wrongdoing. When things go wrong in the lives of other people, when there is injustice, where there are things that we know are just not in line with God's will, we do not rejoice. When I lived in Germany, I learned about a word that has kind of been imported into the English language because we have no equivalent to it in English, called Schadenfreude. Anybody ever heard the word? Schadenfreude, what it means literally is joy because of the misfortune of others. Christians should not be experiencing Schadenfreude, because we know that just as their victories are our victories, their pains, their misfortunes are ours as well. It's selfish. It's selfish to have this kind of schadenfreude because we are now, again, boosting ourselves up, saying, oh, look what's happened to them. Thank goodness it didn't happen to me. Just as God does not rejoice in our sin, in our misfortunes, our pains and difficulties, we should not rejoice in others. Because the next one, circle this one. You've had a long string of crossing out. This one, circle, rejoices in the truth. Love encourages. Love is that safe place where people can come to. And when things go right, when the truth becomes known, when people are finding out who they are, beloved in God, we rejoice. And that word for truth, aletheia, it doesn't just mean an intellectual truth or a thought or a nice idea. It means truth being seen and experienced right here in our world. And we celebrate together. And then this passage ends with these 4 different pieces that we're told each of them is in all things, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And that all things means in all circumstances. So no matter what is happening in your life or the world around us, that each of these things is true of love. The first one, circle, bears. It bears all things. The word actually is stego, and it means to cover, to protect. It's as if putting something over your plants when you know that there's going to be a storm to protect them. This is what love does to us. Our words and our actions are meant to protect those around us, the people that we love. They're meant to support and encourage them, help them to be able to move forward. That is what bearing all things means. And then believes all things, circle believes. And this is a word that I've talked about before in here, pistis, faith. And it means specifically having faith in, trusting in something because you have experienced its reality in your life. And so we are able to have faith in what God is doing in our lives, in the lives of the people we love, and in the world outside of us because we have experienced what God's love can do for us. That next one, hopes all things. Circle hopes as well. Another of my favorite words, elpis. And it means confident expectation in the promises being fulfilled. We know that we have a God who specializes in fulfilling promises, even when it seems like it is against all odds. And we can believe that we have a God who will continue to do that. We are confidently expecting that God will do that in our lives and in the lives of the people we love. And then last but not least, circle endures. This is a military word. And it means sustaining the assault of an enemy coming across you. And so this means to be able to be active, to be strong, to be committed. It is an incredible word. And when you think about this kind of love, a love that is strong, a love that is committed, a love that is active, it's the same kind of love that we see in the life, teaching, death, and resurrection of Jesus. This is a God who was not willing to be apart from us, but who came right down into our world, who endured assault after assault, and who went to the cross out of love for us. And yet in our culture, we are taught so often to give up. We're taught to give up in friendships, in relationships, in marriage, in jobs, in church. When things get tough, when we feel like we're being assaulted from all sides, we want to run away. It's natural, but what we're told here is to be able to stay with it, to be able to love in spite of circumstances. Now, I have to tell you that if there's anything in these that you did not struggle with, if you didn't find at least one thing in there that convicted your spirit this morning, either I did not do my job right or you really weren't listening. Because what is in here is incredibly hard to live out. There's only one person who has ever done it completely with 100% success, and that was Jesus. And I'm sorry, you all are wonderful, but you ain't Jesus. But we know that this is the goal. This is what God calls us to be able to do. I've told you several times in here, in different services and in classes, that one of the things I do each evening is I do a self-assessment before I fall asleep. And in that, I've been using for many years two different scriptures. First is Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. The fruit of the Spirit, the results of a Spirit-filled life are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And if you remember the last time I talked about that, I sang it to you from the children's message. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And then I also use the great commandment, loving the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and my neighbor as myself. And so what I do each night is I look through each of those pieces and I see how it is that my day actually stacked up against it. But recently I've also started using 1 Corinthians 13, specifically about how to evaluate how I did on that love your neighbor part of it. How did I do in being patient, long-suffering with people? How kind was I? Was I irritable? Was I resentful? Did I keep a list today of the wrongs against me? And I have found that that has been, one, a painful experience, but also incredibly fruitful. And so that is why I wanted to share that with you today, so that we could together realize that we have a long way to go to be able to love our neighbors in the same way that Jesus did. But I also wanted to encourage you that you are doing so many things already that are living right into that. One of the best things that a friend of mine in seminary told me was that one of the easiest ways to understand the importance of 1 Corinthians 13 was to go through and to take out the word love and to put in the word Jesus and to read it. And then we understand why it is that we are called to do what we do. Jesus is patient. Jesus is kind. Jesus is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. Jesus does not insist on his own way. Jesus is not irritable or resentful. Jesus does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Jesus bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. In our culture right now, simply being nice is a witness. If we are to try as individuals and as a community to live even more into 1 Corinthians 13, however, being patient and kind and all of those things that we just talked about today, it would not just be a witness, it would be transformative for us, for our community, and for our world. The last verse of that passage, which is not in your bulletin, but almost every wedding ends with these words. 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. We have a world that is desperately in need of God's love. A world that has lost its way, a world that is unsure about individuals' values. We want to be able to share God's love in a way that people can understand. And so my prayer is that we would go out into our community, one, believing that there is love in this world, but that with our words and our actions every single day, we would also be the love in the world. I pray that it would be so. I offer this to you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.